You ever get that creeping feeling that your mind isn't entirely on your side? Not in some over the top crazy way, but in subtle, quiet ways that make you question your thoughts, your choices, and even the way you feel. You walk into a room and forget why you came. You replay a conversation again and again in your head, twisting it, rewriting it, analyzing it until it doesn't even feel like it happened the way you remember. You believe something about yourself or someone else that might not actually be true. That's the dark side of human psychology. And the scariest parts of it aren't lurking somewhere out there. They're inside you. They're inside me. They're inside everyone, quietly shaping the way we act, the choices we make, and the way we perceive reality itself. It often starts with something deceptively simple: lying. Everyone does it, and most of the time it's invisible, almost automatic. You tell someone, "I'm fine," when you're not. You agree to plans you don't want to go to. You say you read a message when you didn't. Small lies, right? Harmless? Maybe. But research shows the average adult tells 1 to 2 lies per day, often without even realizing it. Lying isn't inherently evil, it's a survival mechanism. It protects us from conflict, embarrassment, or rejection. It helps maintain social bonds and navigate complex social worlds. But here's the dark twist: lying affects not only others, but also you. Every time you lie, your brain keeps track of the truth, the lie, the context, and the consequences. That little mental bookkeeping creates cognitive load, leaving you exhausted, distracted, or anxious without realizing why. Even more intriguing, the lies we tell to others are often mirrored by the lies we tell ourselves. Self deception is one of the most subtle, insidious parts of human psychology. How often do we ignore obvious problems because acknowledging them would be uncomfortable? We stay in toxic friendships because they're just going through a phase. We tolerate harmful relationships because things will get better. The brain doesn't just want to survive physically, it wants to survive emotionally. And sometimes the easiest way to survive emotionally is to trick yourself into believing things are okay when they aren't. Picture this: you're dating someone who seems perfect on paper, but they cancel plans constantly, make subtle insults, and manipulate situations in ways you can't quite articulate. Logic tells you it's bad, but your brain, in its bid to protect you from emotional pain, starts making excuses. Confirmation bias kicks in, filtering information so that only the evidence that fits the story you want to believe is registered. You're not weak or naive. Your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do: protect you. And yet, that protection leaves you vulnerable to patterns of harm repeatedly. This self deception feeds directly into memory because memory is reconstructive, not photographic. Every time you recall an event, your brain pieces it together from fragments, assumptions, emotions, and context cues. That heartbreak, that argument with a friend, that family conflict, it might not have happened exactly the way you remember it. But every time you replay it, your brain convinces you it's real. You live by stories your mind rewrites, reinforcing the lies you tell yourself and the patterns of behavior that keep you trapped in familiar cycles. Lying, self deception, and memory distortion aren't isolated phenomena. They form a web that quietly controls perception, judgment, and emotional responses. Think about famous psychological experiments, like the classic Stanford prison experiment. Volunteers assigned as guards began mistreating the prisoners almost immediately. They weren't inherently evil, they were ordinary people. But the situation, combined with self deception, authority, and social pressures, made them act in ways they never would have imagined. Or consider the Milgram obedience study, where participants were willing to administer what they thought were painful electric shocks to another person simply because an authority figure told them to. These experiments reveal something unsettling. Ordinary minds can commit disturbing acts when conditions activate the dark mechanisms already present inside us. And it doesn't stop there. Humans have this incredible capacity for displacement. When we can't handle emotions or conflicts in one area of life, we redirect them somewhere else. You had a stressful day at work and your partner or sibling bears the brunt of your frustration. You justify it in your mind: they deserved it, it's their fault, when in reality, it's your own unresolved tension manifesting. Projection works in a similar way, where we attribute our undesirable feelings or traits to someone else, masking our inner conflicts. That jealousy you feel toward a colleague? Maybe it's because you're secretly afraid of failing, that mistrust in a friend. Maybe you've been dishonest in the past. Combine these patterns with the way social pain is wired into our brains, and you start to see the complexity of the human mind's dark side. Social rejection, exclusion, or abandonment activates the same areas in the brain that register physical pain. That's why ghosting hurts like a literal stab to the chest. That's why being left out or ignored feels catastrophic. Our vulnerability to emotional pain makes us susceptible to manipulation in subtle, almost invisible ways. People can be influenced without realizing it because the brain is designed to seek social connection and avoid pain. Subtle influence techniques like the foot in the door effect, priming, scarcity, and social proof exploit these tendencies. Stores, social media platforms, friends, partners, bosses, all of them use these principles, often unconsciously, to guide our behavior. You think you're making independent choices, but your brain is being nudged, steered, manipulated by invisible forces. The scary part is that the manipulation doesn't have to be overt to be effective. It works best when you think you're in control. Humans are also wired to focus on negative information more than positive. This is called negativity bias, and it is part of why you can replay one harsh word for days while 10 compliments fade into nothing. It's why you scroll endlessly through news of conflict, scandal, or outrage online, feeding your brain with drama. This natural attentiveness to threats and problems evolved to keep us safe. But in the modern world, it keeps us anxious, angry, and addicted to the turmoil of other people's lives. Social comparison amplifies this effect. Scrolling through Instagram or TikTok, seeing curated highlight reels of other people's lives activates the same neural pathways as envy, inadequacy, and self doubt. The combination of self deception, distorted memory, and bias magnifies the effect. Suddenly, you feel like you're failing, even when your own life is perfectly fine. The brain, in its effort to protect you and in its wiring for social survival, traps you in these cycles without any conscious awareness. Our mind's dark side extends further into modern habits like social media and the compulsive need for dopamine rewards. Notifications, likes, new followers, they exploit ancient reward pathways, the same ones that make gambling addictive. Overthinking, anxiety, and perfectionism are amplified, creating loops where your attention is hijacked and your brain reinforces the behaviors that make you stressed or dissatisfied. Habits take over 40% of our daily actions, often without conscious thought. Autopilot mode is efficient, but it also makes us vulnerable to manipulation, reinforces biases, and keeps us trapped in repeating patterns. Combine autopilot habits with self sabotage tendencies, procrastination, passive aggression, sabotaging relationships, self critical thoughts, and you have a recipe for cycles of suffering that are incredibly hard to break. Think about the classic Ash conformity experiments, where participants knowingly gave the wrong answer in a line length comparison task just because everyone else did. That's the dark side of social influence showing itself. Our brains are wired to conform, often against our better judgment. Even when we know something is wrong, the pressure of social consensus can make us act in ways that contradict our own reasoning. This isn't limited to experiments, it plays out in daily life constantly. You might adopt opinions you don't fully agree with just to fit in with friends or coworkers. You might stay quiet when you see injustice because everyone else seems unconcerned. Our instinct to blend into a group to avoid social friction is powerful, and it often overrides logic or personal morals. The same mechanisms explain why people remain stuck in harmful relationships, continue bad habits, or repeatedly sabotage their own success. Our brains are wired to avoid pain, seek approval, and maintain social bonds, even when those behaviors are clearly harmful. Every choice, every thought, every memory is filtered, shaped, and often manipulated by these invisible mechanisms. And the most unnerving part? Most of it happens outside of conscious awareness. Cognitive biases layer on top of these behaviors like invisible filters that distort reality. Confirmation bias ensures we see only what fits the story we already believe. Availability bias makes vivid events or memories seem more important than they are. Hindsight bias convinces us we knew it all along, even when the events were unpredictable. Anchoring bias traps us into fixating on the first piece of information we receive, even if it's irrelevant. These biases don't just distort how we see the world, they distort how we see ourselves, reinforcing patterns of self deception, magnifying insecurities, regrets, and unfulfilled desires. Even the people we trust the most aren't immune. Our brain's wiring for social survival makes us susceptible to subtle manipulation, flattery, or persuasion. That helpful advice from a friend may carry unconscious influence. The charming colleague who seems too good to be true may be exploiting your brain's innate need for trust and approval. Because these processes are invisible, they feel like they originate entirely within ourselves. And this is where the dark side becomes deeply personal. It's not just other people shaping our behavior, it's our own mind subtly guiding us, often against our conscious intentions. The shadow side of human nature emerges in even more subtle ways: envy, jealousy, resentment, aggression, and self sabotage. These tendencies don't usually announce themselves dramatically. They creep in through procrastination, passive aggressive behavior, negative self talk, and avoidance of opportunities. They exist in everyone because they are evolutionary strategies, mechanisms that helped humans survive, compete, and navigate social hierarchies. But in modern life, they often backfire, creating patterns of stress, conflict, and self limitation that are nearly impossible to see without reflection. When you step back, a picture emerges: lying, self deception, memory distortion, biases, social pain, manipulation, negativity, projection, displacement. And the shadow side of the mind aren't isolated phenomena. They're interconnected. They form a hidden, complex network that shapes every thought, every choice, and every emotion. It's both fascinating and terrifying because it means that much of what we consider free will is deeply influenced by mechanisms we can barely perceive. The truth is, your mind isn't a passive recorder of reality. It's a sculptor, an editor, a narrator. It crafts the story you live in, sometimes benevolently, sometimes cruelly. And the only way to step out of the traps it sets is to shine a light on them, piece by piece, until the patterns are no longer invisible, until the shadows of your own brain become something you can see, understand, and finally navigate. To really understand the dark side of human psychology, you have to consider how we deal with uncertainty. The human brain hates ambiguity. It craves patterns, explanations, and narratives, even if those narratives aren't accurate. This is why conspiracy theories spread so quickly, why rumors catch fire, and why people cling to ideas long after evidence contradicts them. When you can't explain why something happened, your brain fills in the blanks. Sometimes it fills them with harmless assumptions, sometimes with distortions that feel entirely real. That's why people replay arguments over and over, twisting each detail in their minds, or obsess over someone's behavior, trying to decode hidden intentions that may not even exist. This craving for certainty also fuels our need for control. Even minor things like organizing your workspace, planning every minute of your day, or insisting on knowing exactly how someone feels are attempts to manage uncertainty. Control feels good because it reduces anxiety temporarily, but it often comes at a cost: rigidity, stress, and an inability to adapt when reality doesn't cooperate. The irony is that our attempts to control everything often make us feel even less in control. Life doesn't follow scripts, people don't act predictably, and the more we try to micromanage it, the more frustration we accumulate. Now, add in the way emotions hijack logic. Neuroscience shows that emotions are not just reactions, they shape decision making, memory, and perception. You might think you're making a rational choice, but your brain is quietly nudging you in one direction based on emotional cues. This is why you might avoid a confrontation you logically know is necessary, or why you forgive someone who repeatedly hurts you. Your mind isn't lying to you in the deliberate sense. It's trying to navigate survival, belonging, and emotional comfort, even if it leads to patterns that hurt you in the long term. Take, for instance, the concept of cognitive dissonance. When our actions conflict with our beliefs, our brain experiences discomfort and it seeks to resolve that tension. Often we do this by changing our beliefs rather than our actions. You might stay in a job you hate and convince yourself, it's not that bad, I'm learning valuable skills instead of leaving. Or you might rationalize a toxic friendship with, they're just stressed, they don't mean it. Cognitive dissonance is a subtle form of self deception, a way our minds protect us from acknowledging reality that feels unbearable. Even memory itself becomes a playground for the dark side. Studies on false memories show that people can vividly remember events that never happened or remember them differently from reality simply because of suggestion, imagination, or repeated storytelling. Every time you recall an event, your brain recording, but like a painting, strokes of reality, shades of emotion, hints of imagination. Over time, the memory becomes less about what truly happened and more about the story your mind wants to tell. That's why you can replay a heartbreak or a fight for months, believing every detail, even though the actual events were more nuanced, less dramatic, or entirely different. Humans are inherently social creatures, and much of our behavior is shaped by the invisible forces of social dynamics. Belonging is wired into our brains, which is why peer pressure works, why social validation feels addictive, and why subtle manipulation from others can feel almost irresistible. Our brains constantly evaluate social hierarchies, alliances, and threats, often interpreting signals that may not even be meaningful. A friend's neutral expression might feel like disapproval. A coworker's brief smile might feel like manipulation. These interpretations feed our insecurities, anxieties, and overanalysis, keeping us trapped in invisible cycles of social stress. Negativity bias further amplifies these effects. The brain gives more attention to negative experiences than positive ones because evolutionarily, threats mattered more for survival than pleasures. That means one critique can overshadow 10 compliments, and one stressful interaction can dominate your thoughts for days. In modern life, this bias fuels anxiety, rumination, and overthinking, especially when combined with social media, where bad news, conflict, and outrage dominate feeds. Your brain interprets these signals as urgent, reinforcing stress and emotional fatigue. Social comparison plays a huge role as well. Scrolling through curated highlight reels of other people's lives triggers envy, inadequacy, and self doubt. Even when you logically know that social media is a filtered, edited reality, the emotional part of your brain doesn't care. It reacts as if you are being personally outperformed or left behind. This constant comparison fosters internal tension, feeding patterns of self criticism, regret, and the persistent feeling that you're never enough. Habits and autopilot behaviors are another layer of the dark side. Research suggests that up to 40% of daily actions are habitual, performed with little conscious thought. This autopilot mode is efficient, but it also makes us vulnerable to manipulation, reinforces biases, and keeps us stuck in repetitive patterns. Self sabotaging behaviors like procrastination, negative self talk, or passive aggression are often deeply ingrained habits, quietly shaping your life without your awareness. Breaking these patterns requires conscious attention, reflection, and consistent effort, but recognizing them is the first step. Finally, projection and displacement quietly influence much of our interpersonal dynamics. We often attribute our unwanted feelings, fears, or insecurities to others rather than confronting them ourselves. That irritation at a coworker may be rooted in stress from your own life. That suspicion about a partner's loyalty may reflect your own fears of abandonment. Displacement occurs when pent up emotions in one area of life are redirected towards someone or something else, often unfairly. These mechanisms are subtle but powerful, shaping our relationships, perceptions, and even memories in ways we rarely notice. And that's where we'll pause for now. The dark side of human psychology is vast, intricate, and endlessly fascinating, and what we've covered so far is just the beginning. There are still layers to uncover, from manipulation and emotional hijacking to self sabotage and hidden biases that shape the way we think, feel, and act every day. So take a moment to reflect on what you've learned here and stay tuned because part two is coming and we're diving even deeper into the shadows of the mind.